What is up, gamers? Today I'll be going over the new Dragonic Overlord, the Rebirth, and we will start with his skills. So, at the beginning of your battle phase, if you have one or more rear guards, lock all of your rear guards, and then at the end of his first battle, you can Cow Blast one, discard a card, and restand him. Whenever he attacks a Vanguard, you can Soul Blast one, and for every 2 of your locked cards, you can retire an opponent's rear guard. And once per turn at the end of the battle he attacks, if you have 5 or more locked cards and 4 or more damage, then you can discard 2, restand them, and get a force marker. So what does all of this mean together? In a vacuum, the Rebirth is a 3-attack Vanguard that doesn't lose any drive checks. If we don't count force markers at all, or triggers, then at minimum, he will be 13k, 13k, and then 23k, assuming you go force 1. And each of those attacks will be twin drive. And in the process, you are able to Soul Blast and retire the opponent's units. So some of the strengths of this card. Due to his first skill, he will be a +1 every time. You sacrifice your field to get 2 restands on him, so you attack. Then at the end of that battle, you Counterblast, discard, and restand him, and he doesn't lose any drives. And then you attack and drive check 2 times again. So you turn your 2 drive checks into 4 total, and only discard 1. So you got 3 new cards during that turn. Another strength is that he just doesn't lose drives. One of the big issues with the X with the end, he loses drive checks. And at most, you will be doing 3 or 4 drive checks depending on if you rode up to 3 first. With the end, you are guaranteed to have at minimum 4 drive checks up to 6. So already with the Rebirth, you will be generating more cards in your hand than what the X normally provides. He also is a very strong late game finisher. With all of Kagero's ways to give power to Vanguard during main phase, you are able to pump the Rebirth up and have him swing for a big number 3 times with 6 drive checks total. And the Rebirth is not restricted by any sub-archetype. So one of the big things in Premium that Kagero lacks is a good finisher. The best one they have is the Legion, which is really strong, but the Legion cannot be put consistently into other decks. So if you want to play like Lawkeeper or Seal Dragons, the Rebirth is a way better finisher than what most of Kagero can provide. He basically mimics what the Legion does by swinging 3 times with your Vanguard really big and getting 6 drive checks total. Obviously, it's not as good because he starts at a lower baseline power and you have to commit a lot more field to do it. But the functionality of it, you can build your deck towards this. So it works very similarly in that regard. With his retire skill, it gives Overlord more access to spot retire. So a lot of the time in Overlord, you don't really run that many retire opponent's rearguard effects because most of it is built towards consistently finding and powering up your Vanguard. So the Rebirth is a nice way to be able to clear the field a bit in the process. So you neg the opponent their hand and their field, and then you're plussing during your turn also. Another strength is that he's an Overlord, and Overlord has quite a bit of privilege in Vanguard. Just having that name gives him access to a bunch of different cards. So like the X can search him out, and Conroe can directly search him out. Those are the main 2 big ones. And for his last strength, he can convert your dead cards in hand into either extra attacks or extra retires. So if your hand isn't strong enough to build like a solid rearguard foundation, then the Rebirth can just lock them up and then convert it into more attacks and potentially force markers in the future. Most of the time, if you're playing the Rebirth in your deck, you're fine with just locking your field anyway, but that's just an extra thing you can do. So the power of your rearguards doesn't matter, so if you really need to also, you can slam triggers down and then lock them for the Rebirth. Some weaknesses he has: he does not naturally gain any power or crit from his skills. A lot of like his strength comes from him not losing any drive checks. So he a lot of his power then comes from whatever triggers you hit and whatever power boosters you can give him during your main phase. Because he locks your field, you cannot use things like Heat Shot to restand with him. And Calamity Tower Wyvern is a little awkward sometimes, because for his last skill, you basically neg 1 for Calamity to give 15k to your Vanguard, so you have to commit another card into play for it. And another big weakness of him is that you lose your field. He converts your field into attacks. So a lot of interesting cards that could go into Kagero become less good if you're playing around the Rebirth. So like Break Breath Dragon and Burn Rise Dragon, both of them activate during battle phase. That's like their main goal. And the Rebirth will consistently lock them. So there's no point on running those in your deck. So it gives you less options of what cards you can put into your deck. Another one is that he does not work with Clear Fame. So if you watched my last video, which was on the original Rebirth, then in that deck you see those Clear Fame, and the whole purpose of the deck was to abuse the new once per turn rulings on the Rebirth and lock your field, and then play Clear Fame to unlock something, and then do Rebirth skill again to relock it, and then you get the restand skill again. Normally you'd be at like 33k double crit with 3 attacks and you don't lose any drives. But that was super piece reliant. You needed the Limit Break Enabler and the Clear Fame to have it work. In the new Rebirth, doesn't need that many pieces, but because his lock skill is at the beginning of battle phase, you lose access to Clear Fame. He is semi-board reliant. He's only board reliant whenever you're trying to go for the 3rd restand. Early game, you're able to have him just be a 2 Vanguard swing that drive checks 4. But then late game, you have to start committing those cards to be able to get that 3rd attack and really put on pressure on the opponent. Due to the nature of his skill of generating extra force markers, he is kind of forced into Force 1, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But Kagero has less access to giving crits to their units, but they have a lot of access to give power. Just the things that give power don't work as well with the Rebirth. And since you're generating extra force markers and consistently locking your field, there's no point getting extra Force 2 markers on the rear guards. So most of the time you'll be going Force 1 on him and stacking them on Vanguard only. And his triple restand is a late game skill, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's mostly that you have to commit a lot of resources to get that 3rd restand and being able to push the opponent for game, while with either of the X combined with the end, you don't have to commit nearly as much to the field. You just sacrifice more in hand for it. All in all, what does the Rebirth do for current decks? So we'll start with the big one, Overlord. So one of the weaknesses Overlord has had is it is very susceptible to early rush, which is why some decks in Premium have started running Stricken, because Stricken makes the opponent have to commit more resources if they want to hit easier, and then it makes them lower their hand count, so then whenever you ride up to the X, then you're fine with just swinging at the Vanguard constantly. And then also having it give 5k and a crit to it, making it 18k triple crit basically, is really good. If the Overlord player gets rushed, they lose out access to a bunch of hand cards, and after they do the Overlord turn, they basically have nothing if the rush goes well. So what the Rebirth does is it allows the Overlord player to basically just say, okay, no guard. It gives them a reward for the opponent rushing them. Now, the reward isn't the freest thing in the world, like you have to call a full field to get the triple restand off still, but you can still ride up to the X, search for the Rebirth, and then convert your swings into basically like a mini Legion turn before you go into Legion. So most of the time, your grade 3 turn will be stronger at that point, assuming you get rushed and get pushed to 4 damage. All of this gives Overlord a nice backup plan and a little bit of flexibility, which is something they've lacked, because a lot of the other Overlords are pretty useless compared to the end. Overlord's just been geared to be hyper aggro, but the Rebirth gives it so much more flexibility between being able to take early hits and be rewarded for it, or a way to more easily slow the game pace down to where you have the upper hand in the long run. The Rebirth in itself does not have a strong synergy with V the X whenever the X copies it. All it basically acts as is the X being extra copies of the Rebirth. So now in your typical Overlord deck, you'd probably run 2 Rebirth, which is very good. Very good. Now in Lawkeeper, the Rebirth is very good in there because Lawkeeper and Rebirth have the same kind of thing they're pushing for, which is to have a field and pressure the opponent with it. So Lawkeeper prevents the opponent from having strong offensive turns the more rearguards you have in play, and the Rebirth wants you to have a full field to be able to lock to have a strong finishing turn. It gives Lawkeeper access to a really good finisher that wants to meet the same requirements that it already is trying to do. Because in Lawkeeper you play a bunch of things that call stuff already, like Doha and Tanya and NASA, so you're able to more easily build a board in Kagero, and the Rebirth really likes that. And then because of the nature of Lawkeeper forcing the opponent to have to call more things down to be able to do more attacks, the Rebirth on his big turn will also be able to snipe those rearguards out whenever he starts attacking and just minus the opponent even more. If we move on to the Dauntless Reverse deck in V Premium, one of the things Dauntless Reverse lacks is the early game can be kind of mediocre, and then the big finishing turn often isn't strong enough to finish the game. Because how Dauntless Reverse wants to play, a lot of his effects want to just nuke the opponent's field and their markers and just keep the game pace for them at a minimum. Combined with Dauntless, it's fairly strong, but Dauntless Reverse is too slow at trying to control the field sometimes. So if you are able to high roll also during your original Dauntless turn and you push the opponent to like 4 damage, then you can ride the Rebirth on Dauntless and get the Dauntless skill, so you basically turn your 3 attacks into 4 attacks and you still don't lose any drives, so you get 8 drive checks in the process also. So you're able to just try to keep the opponent down and end the game off that. Some new decks that are born because of the Rebirth are 2 V Premium lists. So there is a pure Dauntless Rebirth where you're going for the quad restand. So the basic playstyle of it is like a tempo mid-rangey deck where you want to commit resources down early and try to pressure the opponent with high damage. And then by the time you reach turn 4, you ride the Rebirth on top of Dauntless, and then you convert those rearguards you played earlier and lock them, and then have a 33, 33, 43, 43 attack. So how the combo would work is you ride on top of Dauntless with Rebirth, call 5 units and be at 4 more damage, lock your field, and then your attack order, or I should specify skill order. First attack will be 33k, and then you will Cow Blast discard to restand them, and then it'll be 33k again, and then you do Rebirth's last skill to ditch 2, restand them, get a force marker, so then you shoot from 33 to 43k, and then you attack again, and then do Dauntless skill last to discard 3 and restand. So basically, all of this together puts a really strong pressure turn on the opponent, and if you hit any crits, it gets a lot stronger. So typical things you'd run in here are good advantage engines. So one little combination is Toward Cannon and Ammo. Drop your hand down to 4, and then you do Toward Cannon skill to retire something, and since you have 4 less, you draw 1. Then Ammo skill to refund that Counterblast and draw another one. So you go from 4 to 6 cards in hand, and you pop something. You want to play things like Doha and Garon to be able to have a good early rush, and they also call. Doha calls Garon from deck, so it's a free way to get another unit on board for Rebirth to lock. And early game, a lot of the time people don't play as many rearguards, so if they happen to have no rearguards, then the Doha Garon combo will be 22k with normal unit guard restrict. So yeah, here is a sample list if you want to test it out online or in proxy play. It's felt pretty decent so far in the games I've played with it, and there's quite a few angles you can take it. But yeah, the second list is another V premium list, and it's just pure Rebirth. This one is kind of weird. I'm trying to make it a insane aggro deck. You run the X as your main Vanguard, but then have still a lot of Rebirths in your deck, because if you ride either, it's completely fine. And you run a bunch of main phase power games. So like V-Series Striken is pretty decent, because it replaces itself and gives 5k and a crit to Rebirth. So if you happen to go Force 1, you go 28 double crit twice at minimum. But this deck wants to primarily try to go Force 2 and play things like the Stricken and Calamity Tower Wyvern, and from the first V set, Instigate Griffin. It seems kind of decent, since you're able to just give 5k to Rebirth and then lock him. So then your Force 2 turn will be a lot stronger, and you play a lot of the same things you run in Dauntless Rebirth, like Doha Garon for the early game rush, and ammo plus things like Tord Cannon, which Tord Cannon's even better in here now because your main ride is VX, which will allow Tord Cannon to always draw no matter how big your hand is. And you play 16 crit. At the moment you hit 4 damage, you don't want to heal out of it. So you play the 16 crit to try to just kill the opponent as fast as possible. So yeah, in conclusion, how good is the Rebirth? The Rebirth is very good. Very good card. Probably the best card Kagura's gotten in a while. He gives every Kagura deck a Legion-like finisher. Like, sure, you have to commit more to it, but in essence, what it is trying to do is the exact same and is very strong at doing what it does. And the Rebirth in general is my favorite unit in the game. So him coming back and him being this flavorful and good makes me so excited to try him out once he comes out. I will not be playtesting him for a while though, because I am going to Houston Springfest. So I still gotta playtest a bunch for that. But in the meantime, I am still brewing ideas for the Rebirth and cannot wait to have him in my hands. I'm gonna try to get 4 VSR, at minimum 4 SP. If I can get 4 SP, I'll be a happy camper, but I'll be trying to get VSRs whenever he comes out. So yeah, thank you all for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. And I will see you all next time.